Before this video starts, I have a playlist of all the associated videos with this series from the oldest to the newest. You could check it out in the description or my channel if you want to, but they will all vary in quality among different eras of the game, so just keep that in mind. Subspace, the Black Rock scientist, is a support fighter introduced back in late 2022 as the third support fighter in the game, who uses his capabilities to be annoying to the enemy team as much as he can. He relies on the Subspace trip mine gear, and despite all of his all over the place lore, he is a character that is insanely weird in this game in many different ways. How, you might ask? Well, let's quickly see why by going through his overall stats first. Subspace has 175 HP, which seems odd since he doesn't seem to be a healer, but combined with his overall game plan, make him an annoying force to the enemy team. He consistently relies on area denial and applying poison and vulnerability to enemies, making him take more damage and less bulky as a result. The vulnerability is on a percentage and caps at 50% more damage taken, so if someone has 20 vulnerability against an attack that does 10 damage, they will take 12 damage, which makes stronger targets way less bulky and easier to beat. With his kit, he applies tons of vulnerability and poison at enemies, and attempts to disorient them as much as possible and help his team make substantial progress against them and the team as a whole thanks to it. To not spoil anything else, let's just quickly get into the moves of Subspace to understand him more. Subspace's passive, Soul Stealer, gives Subspace 25 HP after every assist or kill he gets. Yeah, that's the entire passive. Subspace's M1, Trip Mine, fires out a trip mine. Firing at the ground or not hitting anyone will spawn a mine that arms and explodes if anyone comes in the activation radius, 30 seconds pass, or if Subspace presses R. These mines also apply 10% vulnerability and do 10 damage along with 10 poison damage. You can place up to 5 mines before you can place any more, but you can also directly hit enemies with an explosion for less poison damage and less vulnerability, albeit at a much faster, consistent pace. Subspace's M2, Fallen Star, spawns an area to where Subspace aims and any enemy hit by it gets launched into the air and gets hit with 10 damage and 10% vulnerability. Subspace can recast it if enemies get hit by it to launch them downwards, dealing extra damage and vulnerability while also applying slow and grounded based on how much time they were in the air before the recast. Subspace can also hit himself with this, but can't use the recast on himself. Subspace's Q, Comet Carnage, fires a crystal projectile with a small arc. Once it hits a surface or a player, it explodes into a poison mist that deals poison damage, slow, and applies vulnerability for every target in it for a period of time before disappearing. His E, Mist Rush, makes Subspace invisible and gains 25% bounce and increased speed for about 1.5 seconds. When activated, Subspace cleanses all debuffs from him and any fighter he runs into gets damaged and poisoned. Finally, Subspace's finisher, Noxious Void, spawns a crystal that acts like a vacuum, sucking in nearby enemy fighters and applying poison and vulnerability to them before exploding and dealing damage. The vulnerability is based on how long the fighter has been in the finisher, and the pull radius is 20 studs. Also, the finisher gets cancelled if Subspace dies during it. Well, that's honestly not a lot to go over since Subspace's kit is actually pretty simple to understand, and in fact, the simplicity of it really makes Subspace stand out as a character. His passive is incredibly boring, but it really does its job. It gives Subspace an incentive to help out against enemies since he gains self-sustain from getting tons of assists and kills, especially for a fighter who lacks a regenerative shield to fall back on. Combine this with potential healers on a team, and Subspace could somewhat manage himself despite being very reliant on assists. His M1 is pretty simple to understand. Traps aren't too big of a priority on most maps to use, as while they can cover routes or rollout spots or spammy choke points, they are usually inconsistent based on what fighter you're up against. Directs, while less powerful, do allow Subspace to immediately apply pressure to targets by stacking vulnerability and poison on enemies to instantly make them more squishy, especially tanky ones like Katana and Banhammer. M2 is a move that exists, honestly. The damage and recast are good damage, and the vulnerability and slow it applies is great. It's surprisingly decent as an escape tool when out close in situations, as it can disorient the person chasing you, which is huge for Subspace. I really don't know what else to add for this move. It's generally just a way to annoy targets more. Yeah, that's about it, honestly. Q is just stupidly good. The crystal is surprisingly fast and easy to land, and the area it takes up is amazing. The gas cloud is great for locking down narrow passages, predicting movements, or simply just making tanky and slower fighters much easier to take down as a result due to how fast it applies vulnerability. E is just exactly what Subspace needs, a rollout and escape tool. Using this move basically gives Subspace a free way to get out of sketchy situations, rolling out, or just repositioning yourself better thanks to the increased speed. While the cooldown can be pretty strict on when you can use it, it allows Subspace versatility in many situations and helps him play with his team better and avoiding unnecessary risks. Oh yeah, and it does damage, I completely forgot about that, and yeah, it does damage, I guess. The finisher is an absolute game changer of a move for better and for worse. On one hand, it can absolutely screw fighters or whole teams over thanks to its area effect and vacuum-like nature, and on the other hand, it does pretty much nothing. This finisher is mainly based on if enemies are around a point that can easily be trapped or simply applying pressure and locking off pathways. It's extremely powerful due to this nature, but it can obviously lack on a lot of maps, either due to it being too open or simply not having much spaces where you can utilize its effectiveness due to its low pull range. However, it is undoubtedly one of the scariest moves to face, and the way it can change tides in games with proper setup and team players is beautiful. You might have realized that I don't really have a lot to talk about when it comes to Subspace, and honestly you're right, because there really isn't much to dissect here. He applies poison and vulnerability and slow sometimes, he controls big areas of maps, he can be a literal annoyance, he can make enemies have a hell of a time against his team. He really has a simple role and incredibly simple moves. What you see is what you get, and Subspace is no different. Vulnerability is truly an amazing tool to have, especially when many bulky fighters and healers are high value targets that Subspace can surprisingly do insanely well against. Even targets like Hyperlaser are easy to chip down due to how slow he is and how hard it is to get Subspace off of him. And really, he is simply fun in that manner. There's nothing complex about him, and hearing the damage ticks and having an overall high area of denial is satisfying to me. He is simply a somewhat easy character to pick up, and his role is pretty easy to understand and adapt with a team with. He can mesh insanely well with pretty much any fighter, as every single fighter appreciates the vulnerability and extra chip damage Subspace provides. And since assists grant him self-sustain, both people profit off of it, and Subspace can continue doing his game plan. To be fair, Subspace struggles long range, as his M1s have a set distance, and trying to use his kit in a long range scenario is fairly awkward, obvious, and inconsistent. But that's fine, since Subspace excels mid-range against basically everyone. He can easily hit directs, slow targets get overrun by vulnerability, fast targets don't want to take avoidable chip, and healers, God forbid, they become easier to kill than they already are, especially Vine Staff, who has practically no mobility options to escape with and can't cleanse herself. Subspace pretty much makes everything for his team much easier at mid-range, and can especially help with big bulky threats that are pretty popular to use in this game. Now, I talked about long range and mid-range, but you might ask, how is Subspace close range? And the answer, pretty terrible. Subspace is more prone to self-damaging himself, and any fighter that can rush anyone down close up can pretty much rush down Subspace every time. Every melee close up could kill him, any ranged close up could kill him, hell, even Boombox pretty much makes him near useless due to that damn shield. Subspace does have two ways of escaping though, either recasting his M2 to find a way to make space or using his E. Unfortunately, using M2 is inconsistent, as some maps won't offer easy ways to avoid fighters with the recast or damage, and the E's cooldown lasts longer than YouTuber apologies, so it'll most likely not be up a lot of the time. Oh, and fighters like Sling and Shuriken can also bully Subspace. While Shuriken is prone to being worn down, especially due to his glass cannon bulk, Slingshot can just maneuver everywhere, while others like Scythe can simply mix up movement or just completely outdamage Subspace in every way and can chase him effectively. And because of his poor mobility outside E, Subspace struggles to juke or even get away from faster threats. So it's safe to say, Subspace struggles incredibly close range and needs to keep his distance so he avoids awful interactions like this. And guess how he keeps distance? I'll give you a moment to figure it out because, you know, he is a support fighter. Yeah, you have to rely on your team for that. Subspace uses his kit to bolster his team's offenses, allowing them to go for harder pushes and take ground against the enemy. Not only that, their offenses help Subspace keep healthy against chip damage or any fighter who really wants to 1v1 him due to his lackluster moves up close and allow him to have longevity. Subspace could also use his teammates to help him close range, as he could blend in with the back or front line well and reposition if needed. Of course, the problem is that you need to rely on your team. This is something I touched on many times before, so I'll keep it short and say this. Teams are unreliable, but considering we are playing a support like Subspace, we simply need to play at our best to help our team out like a team player. However, unlike supports like Vinestaff and Medkit, Subspace fits on pretty much anything. Tanks love tearing down other bulky fighters with Subspace's help, range fighters appreciate easier times carrying down targets with their high damage burst options, and supporters just appreciate damage in general, especially Boombox. Aggressive fighters like Bio and Skate absolutely love being able to completely nuke targets with vulnerability on them, especially Hyper Laser and healers who struggle often against them. And of course, Noxious Void is stupidly amazing if you get the right positioning. Subspace, due to his role, is splashable. He can fit on pretty much most comps and have a sufficient role in weakening the enemy. This is really what makes him so fun. Not only is he simply fun to use and move around with, but the fact you can use him in pretty much most scenarios and get value out of him as long as your team follows through and can play to your strengths. So that splashable nature does come with the price of making goddamn sure that your team isn't just bad. There should be more to talk about. Well, his skins are cool. Look, Subspace just sometimes has nothing to talk about. He doesn't have a complex thing anywhere. He simply stays mid-range and pesters the enemy team with damage over time and that sweet vulnerability. I genuinely really want to talk more about him, but no, he is so simple in every single way that it's honestly kind of boring. Obviously, that doesn't mean that he isn't fun. I find him tons of fun simply due to his role, simple playstyle, and just overall very neat kit that just makes the enemy team more or less hate you. You aren't securing a lot of kills, you aren't in the enemy's face, you aren't camping from long range, you just have the most plain and simple plan and kit imaginable that has many things that basically do the same thing. And honestly, I love it. I can't really describe more without repeating everything I just said, so what I can end this off with is by saying that you should try out Subspace. He is simple and easy to learn with skills that are pretty fun to use and such. If you're trying to get into the game as a whole, he could be a character to try out, especially when it comes to the pretty intimidating support roster, as he is by far the most simple and approachable character of the bunch, with fair weaknesses and fair strengths.